Hello and welcome to Lard TV, and here we are on Boxing Day with the second part of our big Burma Build project. And what have we got here? A bit of an offcut of MDF. I used that to create a corner hill, and this is just the bit that's left, but working on the basis that I never throw anything away, this is going to make a great base for a row of shops. Go on Google Earth today, and it was very much the same in the 1940s, and you will see ribbon developments throughout Burma specifically, which is what we're looking at, where you have a lot of buildings along the sides of the main roads. We're not looking to create those urban buildings. This is a case of doing something fairly suburban, but what we want to do is create a row of shops, little shop units, open fronted shop units, corrugated iron roof, corrugated veranda out the front, and I'm going to start at the very beginning, which is where I normally start when I'm doing a scratch build, which is with the base. No point in designing something if the base doesn't fit. So let's get the Sharpie out, the big marker pen, and mark out exactly what I'm going to be building on this, and we can follow that whole process through all the way to completion. Right, well at this stage, two things we need: a long straight ruler. I use a yardstick because it allows me to get a continuous straight line rather than fiddling about with a school ruler. I want my shop units to really only be about 3 inches wide. So what I'm looking at is having a unit of 3 shops. So I'm going to mark that. I'm not using a big thick pen at the moment. I'm going to mark that roughly on here. So we're going to go 9 inches, and then I'm going to add a little bit more to allow for the walls. So I'm going 9.5 inches. How deep do I want them to be? Well, actually I probably want the units starting near the back, and I want to have a bit of an area here where the goods are going to be out the front. The other thing I want to have is a bit of a lean-to on the side. So if I, looking at the space I've got here, if I make my units 3 inches square, that's going to give me what I want. So again, I'm going to 9.5 inches. So let's draw that on there. By 3 inches deep. And that then is going to allow us 2.5 inches out the front to have the goods on display. So we're going to put our front over here, and each of the units, well, we're going to make that 3 1/4. Let's go 3 1/3, 6 2/3, and that's going to give us our units. So we'll draw that on, and this is then going to provide the template that we work from. We don't have to be too precise here. We're obviously going to have buildings stuck on top of this. But here's our 3 shop units, and we're going to have a bit of a frontage there. And then out the front we're going to want to have, what I'm going to do is cut a little, I'm going to have a little slabbed area on here, and we're going to drill some holes in here to allow us to have our, like a stoop or a veranda on the front, and this is going to be chamfered. So we might as well make the most of the space we've got available. What I also want on the side is a little lean-to in corrugated iron, which is somebody's store house, and we'll just give that a bit of a wide berth. Bear in mind we have to allow a gap here. If we're going to get a chamfer at this edge, our base is going to end a little bit more abruptly. But that should give us the shape that we want for our shop units, And the idea is that we're going to have some goods in this kind of area here and spilling out onto here. This is going to be paved, and that will give us the impression of a bustling shops full of all sorts of produce. So the next thing to do, having mapped that out, this replaces ridiculous notebooks and farty arty pictures, but it does mean we've got a definite one-to-one plan of what we want. So I can now get my materials and measure them up against this. So this is the best architect's drawing in the world because it's perfectly to scale. Okay, so let's get that cut up and then we can start looking at the materials we're going to use for that. So what we've done is taken our section of MDF and cut that out using a jigsaw. Again, exactly the same method as I used in the last film. I cut that to a 45-degree angle, then chamfered the top off with a blade and then sanded that down. So whilst it's quite a thick board, it doesn't actually look it because of those edges. So now the next thing is to take a sheet of this stuff, which is fabulous stuff, foam board, and what I've done is I've marked out on this exactly what we want using our architect's diagram as a template. And I've decided that at the front of the unit it's going to be 2.5 inches high, at the rear of the unit it's going to be 2 inches high, so that's going to give us a sloped roof going away from the front to the back, and then on the front we're going to have a veranda or a stoop coming out the front with more corrugated iron held up with poles. So that is going to give us quite an attractive bit of selling space for our sales staff to get working on. So let's look at that and get that cut out. It's important when you're doing this, check all measurements against the bits. So this is a side bit, and I want to make sure that that's the right size for that. Because whilst in theory it works, in practice that's not always the case. So it's important to just check everything before you make those final cuts. And there we've got our bits. So again, what we'll do is we'll just check them off against our model, just to make sure, because if we stick that too far back it will look like a dog's dinner. So it's just a case of getting it right. So I think what we'll do now we've got that is we're going to start sticking it down, but I'm going to stick down this back wall first because I know that's in the right position, and then we'll build it up from there. So we're going to use a hot glue gun for this. This stuff, absolutely perfect for this job. It sticks like the proverbial.
Okay, and we'll get that sidewall on as quickly as possible because we want to make sure we've got that 90-degree finish there, and the sidewall actually is going to allow us to make sure that the back wall is perfectly upright. And we'll do the same again at the other end. But this time what we're going to do is very quickly, while we've still got a bit of wiggle room, make sure that fits, and it does perfectly. So we'll take that off. And again, check that for spacing. And for the final bit, what we want to do is hold this upright, and then we can literally just drop that on there. Obviously, where we've got a bit of old label, I'm going to turn that around so that gives us a cleaner finish. And there we have it there. You do have a few seconds wiggle room, but literally just a few. And I'm going to hold that in place while that dries because, as I say, in a few seconds that will be solid. And there we've got the basis of our shops.
Having got that in place, what I've done next is I've cut a piece of MDF to fit on that roof. Now we're not going to be fiddling about taking roofs on and off with something this small. They're basically going to be full of old crap. So we're going to super glue that in place, and after that we're going to turn to our trusty Will's sheet corrugated iron, and we're going to put that roof on. So let's do that now. First thing I'm going to do is measure our roof so we can see exactly how big we want it. So we need to mark that and cut that to size. So I will cut that down now. Where I've cut that, I'm going to take a sheet of sandpaper, fine sandpaper, and just rub the edge off there. Now I must admit I'm using offcuts at this point in time simply because we've got a postal strike here in the UK, and the materials that I ordered to complete this haven't come through. So this is fairly wing and a prayer stuff, but we have got plenty of the plastic roof light sections which we can use to make repairs, so to speak, on our main roof. So as long as we can get a coverage, we can then use, and these things would not be built to exacting standards, let's be honest. As long as we get a coverage, and we're going to do that, we can then use bits of that old roof tile to fill in any gaps. So let's cut a few more bits here, and we literally are down to the last few bits. So there we've got our roof, and I'm actually using a hot glue gun for the sheeting this time, simply because it's a nice flat surface, there's no messing about, we'll just keep it really simple. And again, get that on.
while we've still got a bit of wiggle room. So there's our main section, and here's all the skanky offcuts we're going to put at the back. But once we plaster this up, I think we should just about be all right in terms of having what looks like a coherent and consistent roof. Quickly snip that out, and what we'll do is, what a dog's dinner, but what we'll do at the end is go through and just trim up some of those bits, but that's not unlike the look that we really want. And especially as we're now going to add our transparent sheets, which are going to create that variety that they did last time on the build that we did yesterday. But we can already see that our little row of shops are starting to come together, especially once we get this plastered. So let's get those transparent sheets out and add them on. Now we've got our roof in place, or at least the main roof. What we're going to do is use a bit of offcut sprue from another kit to add the porch to the front of that building. So what I'm going to do is cut this to shape. I think I'm going to actually go outside because I'm going to be cutting MDF and I want ventilation. I'm going to cut that to shape. What I'm also then going to do is get this and drill 4 holes for the supports so they're going to hold that in place, and then cut 4 supports which I'm going to use barbecue skewers because they're nice and thick but very easy to cut. So let me go and get this cut now and we'll come back and have a look at drilling those holes. Okay, well, I've been out in the snow and cut that to size. What I wanted there, just to show you on here, is to have it slightly shorter because this is just going to be the support. We're going to be using the wheels sheets there, and what I'm going to do is just mark that and cut a slight recess into the wall there, so I can super glue that in before I plaster it, and then I'm going to be able to plaster up to that. Thinking about it, I might plaster it first, but we'll see. And the other thing I want to do is to mark on the ground. Let's use the straighter edge because where I cut it, it's not perfect, but it doesn't matter because we're going to have an overhang. What I want to do is mark on the ground where that comes up to, because that's going to inform me where I'm going to drill holes for my supports. So let's have a look at that and see where it comes up to. So I'm going to go slightly back from that because obviously it's going to be on a slant. So there, and there. And what we're using are barbecue skewers. So what I need to do is find a drill that's about the same dimensions as that. So rather than just stick it on top, it's actually going to drill through the base and that is going to hold it in place. The other thing that allows us to do is to cut our barbecue skewers a bit longer, get them all the same height, then once they're glued in place, just cut them off at the bottom to make sure we've got unity of purpose in terms of them all being the right height to support that form that's going to hold the roof. So let me get that measured, see how high I need that to be. And what we'll do is we'll put these in first, and that then will inform us exactly to where we want to put that. And there we are, we've got our bamboo skewer going through there, so we'll cut those to size and come back in a moment and secure them in place. And we've cut those. I just used a set of rusty old pliers to do that, but I'm just now giving them a quick rub along the base before we put them in place. Now I'm going to dry run this because it's always worth it. So let's put them in. Right, here's the trusty hot glue gun. I'm just going to put a blob in that hole and poke that in, and then I'm going to hold it in position for a moment because I want to get it absolutely upright rather than on the piss. Great thing about a hot glue gun is you can deliver glue, just squirt it directly into any holes that you've got. And there we go, that is going to be absolutely rigid. We could have just glued these on here with a blob of glue, but it won't work in the same way. By doing that, we've created something that's absolutely stuck to the base. But you can see how stuck that is, the glue's gone right through. What we'll do at the relevant moment, once this is all dried, is just trim that off with a craft knife, a sharp knife. Okay, so now having got that in place, we're just going to make sure that all fits, and then we're going to add that line on there, which is going to determine, I'm just going to cut a little V in there once I've got it absolutely right, and that is going to be the housing for that. So let's do that now. Okay, so they're all nice and level. We want that at a slight angle, but not too much. So the key thing here is to just gently put a line on. I like to use a fine pen for this. There we go. And that determines where we're going to just cut our slight recess. While we're waiting for the hot glue to heat up, what I'm going to do is just put some lintels over these doors. A lintel is a load bearing bar, usually concrete or these days more likely steel, but that's what supports the weight, because you build your pillars and then you put the load bearing support over there, then that allows you to carry on building over the top. It's just a little bit of detail. Architecturally it's important in real life. It's obviously not important here, but what it does is it breaks up the tedium of the flat front of the building. So let's measure that out, cut that to size, and we'll cut 3 of those, and that will give us our 3 lintels. Now normally I would use PVA glue here, and I'm thinking about using super glue just for speed, but actually no, what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this and then I'm going to go in and use PVA underneath there, because whilst its speed's attractive, it's usually the wrong solution. So let's set them to one side. Our hot glue should be ready to go now, so we will give that a blast. And we'll just apply that in that furrow. And now that's done, let's find the flat edge, which is that one. We'll put that in place, and I'm not actually going to attach these poles to it because I don't see any point. You're just going to get a blob of glue, and they're doing their job. They're already rigidly in place. They're doing their job, serving as supports. So they're quite happy the way that they are. So there we go, that's all in place. As I say, the lean-to's got to go on here. The other thing that we're going to be doing is adding some foliage, but I'm not doing that at this stage because I want to get all this plastered before I add foliage, because the foliage would really only just get in the way. So that's where we are with that. I'm going to stick these lintels in place using PVA, and then the next job is going to be to plaster this building. Right, now we've got our front veranda roof in place. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plaster the building. There's something I need to think about here, because I was going to put a tin shack on the end using the corrugated iron sheeting, but we just don't have enough of it because it's not arrived. So I'm going to create a wooden shack, and hopefully I'm going to have enough of the corrugated iron to put a tin roof on that. But I'm going to do that after I've got it plastered, because that's going to be created, that's going to be built, the structure is going to be built in foam board again, and then I'm going to put the wood planking on the outside afterwards. So there's room for me to add that afterwards once this is plastered. So what I need here is my interior quality polyfiller. This is fine surface polyfiller, which is nice because it allows it to be sanded down very easily, and also allows for a very fine finish. And I'm going to be applying that using a palette knife, but you could use a butter knife, which is what I use if I can't be bothered to find this. So let's have a look at how we do that now. Some very simple ingredients here. Just put our polyfiller out, and what I'm going to start with is, we can see these fairly horrible obvious gaps at the top where we've got the meeting of the roof and the walls, which is always going to be imperfect on a scratch build, and that's really the place where we want to start and get that filled in, and so it tidies that up. I'll start on this flat surface because this will show you the very basic technique, although to be fair, the technique doesn't get a lot more involved. And this doesn't have to be completely perfect, but at the same time get it as good as we can. We're always going to have a second bite at this apple, in as much as we're going to go back and I'm just going to dip this in water and try and float that off. But once it's dried for about 5 minutes, I'm going to go back and polish that up. We're going to have a second bite because we can always go back and sand it down. So this is the horrible bit along the top here. But remember, this isn't our finished front veranda roof. It's very much just the basis. So if we get any filler on it, it doesn't matter at all. Okay, right, well, done that front bit pretty roughly. What we'll do, come back here, dip my finger in the water, and then just use that to float off a relatively smooth finish. You're going to find imperfections. It's perfectly alright to just go back and add a few bits, but it's also alright to leave this imperfect, because this is not going to be, nobody's going to be winning awards for plastering when they're putting together ramshackle shops. So let's go on and do the back. Starting again with that horrible gap at the top. And of course we're going to do the same on the roof as we did with the conversion kits that we were using. So I'm just going to go over there, filling in those gaps, especially here where we were disappointed but not to receive the stuff we needed in the post. But let's rub that in. Get those gaps filled, and obviously once we get some paint on that, and especially once we get the PVA on that, that's going to be pretty seamless. And there we are. We can see that we've pretty much got our plastered shop unit. Hardly any effort at all. I mean, that literally took me 5-10 minutes at the very most. And there we have it. We've got our beautifully plastered building. I'm just going over it, a couple of places, so it just needs a bit of a rub down just to get some rough edges off, but generally that is absolutely rock solid. And what we're doing next is
On the veranda we were looking to have a tiled area, and I'm turning once again to Will's Scenics, and this is granite sets. They're the type of, well, basically a set is a cobble, but a more regularly sized one. Normally they come as dice shapes and they're laid out to make a road surface. But what I'm going to do here is cut this in a semi-irregular pattern. So again, it doesn't look like it's been laid to perfection. It's been laid with whatever is to hand, and we're just going to have a cobbled area underneath that veranda. What I've also done is I've also cut my sections of corrugated iron to fit on there, and I've also just about squeezed out sufficient bits to make a roof and a door to the lean-to at the side. So that's going to be the next phase of the build. So we're going to put the cobbles down. That's very simple. Cut it out, stick it down. I'm not going to show you that. You're perfectly capable of cutting things out and sticking them down. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add these, and then we're going to build the lean-to at the side and fit that on. In addition to that, I've cut myself a load more balsa strips, and that's going to allow us to add those plank walls. So that lean-to building is going to look like it's a wooden structure with a corrugated iron roof and door, which is pretty much the look we're looking for. So let's get on and do that. Okay, so we can see what I've had to do is chop out bits and pieces to work it around that, but we're going to fill that in with our polyfiller, or maybe just sand, and have a few weeds coming through there, but largely that's going to have goods stacked outside the shops. So that, and I've just taken that inside the shops, no further back. So if you're looking at it from a typical wargaming angle, it's going to look like it's cobbled inside. There we are, that's glued in place, and we'll very quickly cover that imperfection up with the one last bit of plastic glazing that I retained for exactly that purpose. So that's good. What we now want to do, I've just got enough corrugated iron to give me a roof about that big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark that up exactly so I can see the size that we've got. So again, I'm using this board as my architect's blueprint, and then we can work precisely to that rather than guessing. So let's put those to one side and get cutting our foam board. So now we need to cut our wood to
to do to plank our building. So there we go, that's given us a good guideline. So let's add that, and this is where using the wood covers up a multitude of sins. So that actually is a nice fit. But if that was short, the thing to do is to push the wood up to the top, because at the bottom we're going to be adding our ground cover, so we would be able to hide that there. Okay, so we'll keep going. So there we have it, there's our lean-to. There's some bits there which we need to tidy up, but we'll come back and do that very shortly when we have a look at the next stage.
Okay, so we've got our basic building done, and what I've done is I've taken that, and as you can see from the fact it's all smeary and blurry, I've washed that over with PVA and water mix. I used a strong mix on this because it's scratch built, and so I do feel that adding probably 75% PVA, 25% water, that stronger mix binds it all together, because we don't have the solid base of an MDF kit to put this on. But now this is pretty solid. So what else have I done? Well, I have added a little bit of polyfiller around those bases, just filled in those gaps to make that look constant. I've also softened the edge with polyfiller as well, so we don't get a very distinct edge where the slabs meet the ground cover that we're going to put on. So the next phase of this is to get this ready for painting, but before we do that there's something we've got to do first. Let me show you that. You might remember that when we scratch built our model, one of the earliest things I did was to drill some holes in and put some plants in. Now we're still going to want to add plants. In fact, I've set some aside here. I think we're going to have a couple of palm trees at the side, a small one and a larger one. We'll have one over here to the rear of the store, and we're going to have a couple of bits of just general large plants knocking about. But what I can't do is add them at this stage, because I want to have a clear run at painting this model. But I'm going to mark them up and drill those holes so that's ready to go. So once the building is done, we can then add those in. I'm also going to have to paint these apart from the base, which is fine. There's only a little bit to do, 5 bits. And then I'm going to get on with spraying this. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to spray it black and then paint the bulk of it brown, leaving the metal roof in black. So I'm going to drill those holes now, or at least I'm going to mark them up for where I want them to be drilled. Then I'm going to get them drilled. And again, just by having these there, it creates a very, very different look and creates a scene rather than just a model building. Nice and simple. I'll get that drilled up and I'll get that undercoated as well. Well, as we can see, black top, brown sides, and what I'm going to do now is paint that up, and I'm looking for a kind of an off-white finish, but I actually start with quite a deep tone. In the last film that we did, I told you how I did it, but I didn't actually show you, so I'm going to show you now. This is a golden colour.
which is the same paints as we used last time, golden brown. So I'm going to use a nice flathead brush and get that on there. And this is going to serve as our base coat. Obviously, there's no way you're going to avoid getting a bit on the roof and a bit on the woodwork of that lean-to, but the important thing is that we can come back and touch that up, so don't worry about it. Make sure we go inside the door, returns there. Okay. So we're going to leave that to dry just until it's tacky, because we really want to get on with our second colour while that's still tacky, because that allows us to create the blend. So we'll give that 10 minutes or so and then come back to it. Right, our next colour, desert sand. Annoyingly, I think that was my fault because I used a brush that was wetter than I thought it was at the outset, but because what these two, one should follow on neatly from the other. Oh great, I've run out of bloody paint now. And I think I possibly have. Let's try and see what we can fish out. Not a lot, so let's give it a go then, see what we can get out of this. So we've got that on there, it's still tacky, and we're going to go with that. And you can see how the two are blending in, hopefully you can. And that's kind of what we want. And again, don't worry about getting paint on the other bits, it's just completely unavoidable. See if we can rescue a bit more from that pot. Yeah, that'll do us. So we can see that I'm not being precise here, this is literally just a case of slap it all over. And actually the more slapdash we are, the more we get that blend. And now what I'm going to do is add a bit of white to that. Mix that up. And start putting that on again. So again, we're getting depth because this is the third colour, and I'm not really allowing this to dry in between. The only reason, as I say, is I allowed the first bit to dry was that I'd used a wet brush. Okay, so that's kind of our basis. We can see that we've got quite a degree of depth there in terms of different tones coming through. And I'm going to let that dry now. We do have to let this dry, and what we're then going to do is go over and give it its final coat, which is a final couple of coats, which are going to be much lighter, and that will then complete that model in terms of the base colour. Okay, here we go. given that a bit of time to dry off, and now we're going to add a green grey. This is a Vallejo. I wouldn't normally paint a whole building with Vallejo, but just for this top coat, what I'm trying to do is get some of, change my brush, I'm not risking using a damp brush again. I've just get a bit of that and mix that in with it, so we're keeping a link between the tones. Give that a go over there, because this is going to be much more a case of a semi-dry brush, and you can see that's going on, and hopefully, as we're in December, there's not great light, you can see that that is not obliterating the base colours underneath, but is going on top and providing a bit of a highlight. A bit more than a highlight, but and then what we'll do, we'll get some white and add that to the party. So especially on these wide open spaces, avoid the top bit where there's shadow, and really focus more towards the middle and bottom. That then will give a bit of depth to our model. And a bit more of that. This is the problem with using high quality paints to do this job. We've obviously got a lot more shadow in here, so we'll just dab a bit on each of those pillars and at the edges, and that's the job done. That is it, but you can see, if we want to go over that and just highlight it up later more, we can, but I'm quite comfortable with that. This is a very rudimentary building. Once we get our plants and that on, that will be masking a lot of that. We're going to be using posters to add on to that. So I think that is a good finish, which looks like there's been different colours on there, but with sunlight and time have aged, or maybe yellowed through time. So there we go, that's that. Clearly the next step is going to be to go back over this and clean up these this area where we painted that black. So I'll do that now. Well, having let that dry, we've got our build up of colours there. What we're going to do now is paint the roof. Very, very simple. I'm going to use a large brush for this, and I've got my black and white paint over here. Just going to mix up, well, sort of medium grey, dry brush that on. So a fairly heavy dry brush here, but you can see that that's really brings out the detail on those corrugated sheets. And we can also see that where we've had to cut the odd bit here and there, it just doesn't matter on that type of building, because the look of it anyway is something that's run down. And while I'm here, I'm going to do those slabs at the front because we want them in grey sets. These are the cobbles, so you can see that we've got a cobble effect, and what I'm going to do is add a bit more white to that, dry that off, so we're just getting where there's areas of traffic. We can see we're just highlighting that and getting the effect we want. So, and while we're here, let's just give that a bit of a dry brush over just to clean our brush up. There we go, that's it, that's the first stage. What we're going to do, let that dry for a little bit, and then we're going to come back and we're going to, a little bit excess there, we can take that off. We're going to be using our sponge in a bit because we're going to be painting rust, because that's important. On something like this, we can't have it looking pristine. In fact, it doesn't look pristine anyway, but we really want to highlight the fact that this is run down and ramshackle. So we're going to come back and do that very, very shortly. We'll just let that paint dry. There are a lot of options for painting rust. You can buy things like these pigments, which are very specifically for rust, medium rust, light rust. You can buy washes. Vallejo do a fabulous set of paints for simulating rust. This is a really nice wash called light rust, which we're going to be using, and they also, you can use some little very bright colours in there, like you can use a beige red, you can use even a salmon rose to really highlight some points. But what I'm going to try and do here is just give you a basics, which doesn't involve buying all these specific products. So what I'm starting with here is a Vallejo Cavalry Brown. An alternative to that would be the red leather, but let's go with the Cavalry Brown because I like that first because it's quite dark. And what we're going to do is just mix that 50-50 with a Army Shade soft tone. You can also use their brown tone, but I'm going to go with a soft tone because it really is just a bit of a medium for getting the paint moving. And we're going to mix that up there, about 50-50. I'm going to keep them separate on my palette, and I'm also going to use a bit of water just to get that liquid. And what I'm going to do is just dab that along the edges fairly randomly. Where there's any damage, what I've done is, I'll keep that liquid. What I've done is when I put my sheets on, I've intentionally carved bits out of the edge to get them looking like it's a rusty old bit of metal, so we want to add that rust on there. So I'm just using that on, applying it quite liberally. Just 50-50 of each, but also probably about 30% water, so we can see where I'm just adding that on. And what I'm doing is I'm following the lines of where the sheets of corrugated iron come to an end, dabbing it on the edges. The edges is where you're going to get the most rust. And these replacement sheets as well, don't forget them, because that really makes them stand out on the model. So we'll put that on. It's getting a bit dry, so we'll just keep adding a bit of water as we need, and we can be quite generous here, because what we're going to do in a moment will amaze you, but it probably won't actually, but we'll do it anyway. And this is one of the reasons why we want a fairly wet mix. Putting that on again, focusing on all those points where the sheets have edges, and that includes where we cut and join bits up, because the very idea of where we cut and join bits up is that they are different sheets of corrugated iron. So let's get that on. And then what we're going to do, we're going to use a bit of sponge which we've taken out of the packet of figures, and we're just going to move that down over the model there. And it doesn't matter if we don't get perfect coverage, we're not looking for that, but what we've done by doing that is created that streaked rust effect very, very simply. I mean, you could actually put that on the, well, I'd let it dry first, but you could actually put that on the table now in that state, and we'll go around and we'll do that in our other areas. Because we're using a lot of water and a bit of wash in there as well, quite a bit of wash in there as well, it keeps that nice and wet, so we don't have to do it instantly. If we were just applying paint, you wouldn't get the same effect. So there we are, let's get that on there. We'll leave that to dry, because not to dry, just to sit, because it's a bit too wet at the moment, and we'll probably get more of an effect than we want. In a moment we're going to go around and add a bit more detail to be a bit more specific about where we're going to apply the rust. But let's not forget that edge that we intentionally roughed up to get that effect. And again we're going to go, and what actually I'm going to do here, because this is on a slope, I'm actually going to push it a bit upwards and then bring it down again. Okay, so there we have it. That's the first stage, and nice and easy it was too. I've used far too much of that paint there, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply some red leather, which I seem to be running out of again. It's not my day for paints. So we're going to use the red leather, which is a lighter colour. And we're going to do the same again. We're going to add some water and we're going to add some wash just to create that lighter colour. And we're going to just start going over this and just creating a bit of a highlight. And the other areas where we want to concentrate are on the edges of these sheets coming down here. So where those wool sheets show that they've got a join, you can accentuate that by use of our paints. So again, you can be fairly liberal, splash it all over, because in a moment we're going to be using the same technique, and this is one of the reasons why we don't do it too quickly, is we want to give it a bit of time for this paint to dry, because otherwise we'll just wipe the bloody lot off. Having this contrast in colours really just highlights differing levels of rust. Let's get that on. And as you can see, this is not a scientific process. This is we're making sure it's touching in the areas we want, but if we're going over onto other areas, it really doesn't matter that much. But equally at the same time, don't apply it in a totally shotgun manner. And what we're going to do is same again. I might let that dry for a bit longer, but because you're here, I'll just do it now. But I'm doing that quite lightly this time. I'm not smearing it down quite as much. This is just a general case of moving the paint and taking it from the bottom as well as from the top. And we can see that what we've got there is kind of a second level of colour. We've got a bit, it's a bit brighter. Let's do this again. So in a way, what we're replicating here are the basic, techniques of a base coat and a highlight, but we're doing it with rust. I'm quite pleased with that. So that could quite happily go on any table. But let's have a look at those. Let's have a look at those slightly more specialist products, because we've got this. I really rate, and if you don't want to buy the whole Vallejo rust kit set, just get this. It's a light rust wash, and that comes out looking, well, very wet indeed. And what we can do is just cover that on whole sections. It suggests that this rust that we've been putting on here is spreading. And you can again work very much with the lines that are there on those Wills sheets to bring out the different panels. But what we're doing here is, rather than touching just the edges, we're giving it more coverage on the panels. And this is wetter, so we are going to do the same again in terms of dragging that sponge across it, but we're not going to do it quite as rapidly. We're going to give that a bit of time to settle in and dry. Now I'm doing this fairly roughly because I don't want to take too long on too much of your time. Because I know it's boring watching somebody else paint, but I'm trying to just give some ideas of the different techniques you've got. So there we go, let's do that. And again, let's wipe that down, but just more of a gentle wipe rather than that intense smear that we did in the first instance. And we can see again where you've got, it just creates a different tone. Now, we do have to let that dry now. You'll be glad I'm not going to bore you to tears putting any more paint on, but that is the basis of our roof. Come back in a few minutes time once that's dry and we'll have a look at the next stage. Well, there we are, that didn't take long. Now, here we go. Here's the next level. This might surprise you, or it might not. Silver. I've got some silver paint, I've got some white paint, and I've got some black paint, and I'm just going to mix up using a big flat-headed fluffy brush, because you want to make this very light, but I'm going to mix up the silver and the white and the black. That's a bit too dark, so we'll add a bit more silver and a bit more white. We're going to make sure that our white and our silver are always in balance, like yin and yang in one of Sydney's ridiculous Japanese bonsai bonkers games. Right, so brush that off to make sure we've got a dry brush, and then what we'll do, we'll just take that right over the top. Not too roughly, just quite gently. And that will just give us a slightly metallic edge to it. And we can see there, we're gonna tone this down in a minute, but we can see there that what we've done is just highlighted that. Even if we were to put some matte varnish over that now, that would flatten that down, but that has created that texture. It's really brought out. Let's just go a little bit more, we don't want to go too much. That's really highlighted the difference in texture with that corrugated roof there, and that's what we want to bring out. So there we go. It's using that bit of silver. It's not really, you'll never see a silver highlight on a real life roof of that type, but what we're doing is we're playing tricks with the eye a bit. We're giving the eye what it wants to see rather than what it would see in reality. So we know that's basically a metal roof, so we've just given that an edge, a bit too much in one or two places, but we can easily go back and do that again. And what we're going to do now, that rust that we've already put on has become a bit of an undercoat, but we're going to do that again, but a little bit more gently, a bit more lightly, and just bring in some patches of rust. So we'll get on with that immediately. So I'm actually going to repeat the process here. So we're going to start off but with a slightly smaller brush. I don't know what I've got here, maybe a 1, whereas before I was using a 2 or a 3. So don't forget the water, and we'll mix up that mix of those two and just go over, but more targeted this time than we did it last time. And again, focusing on those points where we created that damaged look. So you can see this is not as much of a tosh-up as last time, but it's much more targeted. This is going to allow us to put a lot more detail on specific panels, and the nice thing is now that we've given it that dry brush, we can really, that's really brought out those specific panels. That allows us now to see exactly what we're painting. So what I'm doing here, I'm going a lot more down the edges of those panels than I did the first time round, where we relied on that streak effect by pulling that sponge across it. I'm not going to streak that yet, but I'm going to carry on and do the whole thing. I'm actually making sure I'm running this over everything now, but I'm doing it very gently, so it just takes any excess with it, and that creates a streaking effect across the whole thing. And it also really softens that paint up. If you clawed it on a bit in one place, it really does soften it up. Okay, so that's our first layer. So we're going to introduce our red leather now, which again is still run out. Nobody's magically refilled it. So we don't need a lot of this, fortunately. We'll add a bit more of that soft tone. Soft tone's a nice medium because the tone is soft, but it actually then turns into more of a medium than actually using the colour itself. So let's go over this now. A few highlights. And an even lighter brush over that time, because the lighter the highlight, the lighter the brush over. But again, we can see how whilst that dry brush, the silver base, took a lot of that rust off in terms of its prominence, it actually now, by adding that a lesser amount, the stuff we put on originally serves as a beautiful depth of colour, which is what you want with rust. It's that depth of damage, if you like, to the metal that really makes it show up. Now we can go and highlight this up with things like the salmon rose. We don't need to, it's kind of done, but especially as this is not very well mixed. But let's see if we can get some out and make it out. There we go. So what I do is I use that salmon rose, mix in with that red leather, and just in one or two areas, and this is really finely done. Just pick out an edge, especially on these additional sheets that have been added on. Very much again as we would when highlighting a figure. So let's just tone that down a bit with our sponge. But there we have it. I'm happy with that. You can go and start using your pigments and doing all sorts of exciting things, but hopefully that's shown you how you really don't need all these special rust techniques. The only thing I really keep saying and keep coming back to is that Vallejo light rust wash, which is absolutely great and helps to give that depth. You could achieve that by really watering down some of your paints, but if you've got a tool in your armoury, why not use it? And I would suggest that's the one luxury you need if you're doing corrugated iron. So that's kind of it. You can carry on doing that till the cows come home, but really it won't make an awful lot of difference. I think what we've done there is shown you the basics. So there we have it. I've actually just got to paint up this corrugated door, and we're nearly at the point where we can add our plants. So let's come back and do that shortly. So we've got our roof done, and now we are really at the stage now we're about to dress the base before we're going to put our surface texture on, which is going to be sharp sand again. What I've done is I've just gone over the base and given it a wash over with sand colour, because where I've sprayed this, some of the areas have got a bit dirty, and the thing about using sand as a base is that the colour underneath can show through, so I've at least taken the worst of that off. The next stage is to make a decision. Do we now add all the bits that go on the base, like our bits of foliage,
like bits of clutter, or do we put the sand on the base and then add the rest? Well, for me, that decision is determined by how busy the base is going to be. I will always put plants in before I put the ground texture in, because that helps cover up where any glue is and actually reinforces the bond with the base. But the issue then is about the sand and whether you're going to put anything, any scatter on here. Well, my rule of thumb is if it's busy, add the scatter first. If it's minimal, add the scatter second. So in this case, I think the best way to illustrate the situation we've got here is to show you the image of what effectively looks like a large bus shelter with nothing in it. And now let's have a look at this and see what happens once we add that clutter. And I think you can see that this is what the whole thing is about in terms of having a larger base to allow you to set the scene. If that building was freestanding, it wouldn't allow us to create the mini environment that we're creating here. So what we're going to do is we are going to stick all those bits in place. I'm going to use super glue for that, and then we're going to stick the trees in place, which, if you saw the last video, is a simple process of just gunning the hot glue into the holes and then poking them in. And once it's dry, we'll just cut off any excess glue that seeps through the bottom, which is fine. So I'm going to crack on with that now. Okay, let's hope they don't fall off. And there we have it. Excuse the poor light, I'm rushing to get this out in time. It's taken a lot of time and effort to produce. So what appears to be an hour's video is taking a long time, and I'd rather underestimate it. So I'm having to operate despite poor light. Well, we can see, there we have it. We've got all our foliage on. We're obviously going to be putting weeds and stuff on the back. So now the next phase is actually just to go around, and where I've painted these, just touch up anything that needs doing, but actually it doesn't appear to be an awful lot, because we're in the last chance saloon now for painting, because we're about to put the sand on. So that looks okay. So let's spread our newspaper out so it's easy to pick that up. The joy of a broadsheet newspaper, and then we can get that sand on the base. Again, as with the last build, I'm avoiding those edges because I'm going to sieve that and put a finer grade of sand around the edges. Right, I'm going to have to be quick now. The wife's out walking the dog and I'm about to use her best sieve. Well, her only sieve if I'm honest. So I'm just going to sieve it straight onto the base.
Right. Let's get that straight on there. So you can see we've got a different grade of sand, as I mentioned in the last video. Just not having knobbly bits on the edges protects it and stops you catching and knocking bits off. Right, get that out of the way before she comes back. And there we've got it. Our bazaar, if you like. Pinch of that where we've missed bits. We can always cover up any gaps with our ground cover, which we're going to put on once we've got that dried. So next step, let this dry. It's going to take at least an hour. Then come back with a PVA, wash it all over with a mixture, 50% PVA, 50% water. That's going to soak that up. I think I've said it before, like blotting paper. So that's a nice job. Then let that dry again. That will be rock solid. At that point, we're going to come back and paint that surface, or more to the point, wash that surface with an ink. So there we go. Let's put that to one side. We'll see you in a minute. And there we have it, our completed row of shops for Burma. They, I think, are going to look very nice at the side of the road to Mandalay or Rangoon. So what we also done is done another industrial building alongside this, which I'm going to show you, which for sake of time I wasn't able to film. But we can see here that we've used a Sarissa industrial unit. What we've done is we've changed the roof from the skylights to use those wheels sheet of corrugated iron again, the ubiquitous corrugated iron that you see in colonies throughout the former colonies throughout the world. We've also used the Empires at War fencing, which is really nice. You can't really have an industrial unit without a fence, and of course once I added the yard there, I had to cut through and put in a door so you can access the storage house. So we've got an export organisation there ready to sell their goods throughout the empire and the world. And again, that is really going to add to that mix of local buildings, but also some industrial buildings, light industry, that came with the colonial powers who were there. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this. I have to apologise for the length of this film, but I wanted to show you some, well, all of the techniques that we used. Hopefully you haven't been bored to tears, and obviously take this opportunity to wish you a very happy Christmas and a happy New Year.